Hello, I am Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at the University of California, Irvine. Here bringing you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas war. It is currently the evening of February 2nd, 2024 in the United States, the morning of February 3rd, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, the Israeli expanded cabinet met today about the deal. Many leaks from cabinet gave us some information about where things stand with regards to what was discussed in Paris and what everyone is currently waiting for Hamas to reply about. According to the leaks from the Israeli cabinet, there is still no draft of the agreement, but rather a framework that the negotiators brought forth and was accepted by Israel. According to, again, the leaks from the cabinet, this framework includes 1 day of truce per every hostage that is released and 2 phases to the entire hostage exchange. The first phase will include the release of 35 hostages in exchange for 35 days of truce, plus another 7 days built into the first phase, so 42 days of a truce in the first phase, in order to allow for another week to negotiate the second phase. This confirms the leaks that were several days ago, both in the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, that the truce is going to be 6 weeks in the first phase. It also adds that the truce can be another 100 days, i.e. another over 3 months, if it is in fact continued, and there will be 100 hostages left in captivity, and therefore 1 day per each hostage. One of the important things is that the leaks do not state how many Palestinian prisoners would be released. According to at least the way things were worded in the leaks, it seems that that was not part of the initial framework. So Israel agreed to this framework in principle, but it does not include how many or which Palestinian prisoners will be released. In addition to this, there were reports from the Israeli cabinet that Minister of National Defense Itamar Ben-Gvir and Minister of Finance Bezalel Smotrich, as well as other members of the Likud, were vehemently opposed to a pause in the fighting. Other ministers approved it, stating there's no other way to bring the hostages back. Prime Minister Netanyahu, again at the end of the meeting, repeated what will not happen, stating we will not let the war stop and will not stop our efforts to destroy Hamas. We will not release thousands of Palestinian prisoners, and we will not evacuate the IDF from the Gaza Strip, adding that he hopes everyone will agree on the terms once they are brought forth. Relating to speculations from Hamas, everyone is waiting for Hamas's answer, reportedly is going to come in the next 24 hours or in the coming days. The Wall Street Journal reported today that contrary to previous reports, Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, is actually in favor of accepting the initial pause of 6 weeks, while Ismail Haniyeh, the official leader of Hamas, but really the leader of the external Hamas that resides in Doha, is insisting that the group hold out for a complete ceasefire. This matches more the previous rounds of fighting between Israel and Hamas. Commonly what would happen is the leadership inside the Gaza Strip pushed towards a truce because they were suffering from the fighting, whereas the external leadership kept on saying, no, we have to adapt a hardline stance. In this war, up until now, it was actually the leadership in the Gaza Strip that kept on saying we're adopting a more hardline stance. According to this report in the Wall Street Journal, that position is now reversed. In addition, Hamas reported today about a phone conversation that occurred between the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, and the leader of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Ziad Nahalla, regarding the negotiations. According to the Hamas statement, the both agreed that the deal must lead to an end of the war, a complete IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, removing the siege on Gaza, rebuilding the Gaza Strip, and a complete prisoner exchange. So that is adding more terms than even Hamas initially stated. In addition to this, Hamas leader in Lebanon, Osama Hamdan, today repeated the statements that Hamas is reviewing the deal, adding that Hamas is going to demand the release of Palestinian prisoners from all Palestinian factions. Hamas has been making this very clear that they want to present themselves not as fighting just for Hamas, but instead for the entire Palestinian population, and therefore they're going to demand the release of prisoners from all factions. Specifically, Osama Hamdan noted Marwan Barghouti, that is one of the most senior Palestinian prisoners, who is the leader of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade from Fatah, as well as Ahmed Saadat, who was the leader of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. So Osama Hamdan was stating that Hamas is going to demand the release of both of them as part of this deal, likely part of the second phase rather than the first. In addition, AP also quoted the senior Hamas official saying that the permanent ceasefire is the most important thing for the group. Everything else can be negotiated. Moving on to the fighting in the Gaza Strip, there were no rockets or mortars sent from the Gaza Strip to Israel in the last 24 hours. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, the northern parts of the Gaza Strip in El Shati refugee camp, the IDF is continuing its operation that it started several days ago. Ongoing gun battles were reported throughout the camp. The IDF reported that 10 Hamas operatives were killed. In Gaza City, the Al-Qassam brigades, that is the military wing of Hamas, reported intensive fighting in the city, stating that their units managed to kill 15 IDF soldiers. I will note that the IDF did not make any announcement about this, and it's not confirmed anywhere else. However, that is the report from the Al-Qassam brigades. In addition, there was a report in Israel that a suspicious aerial target was launched from Gaza in the last 24 hours and was intercepted. Likely this refers to a drone, otherwise they would have called it a rocket or something like that. In the central parts of the Gaza Strip, there was a report today that the IDF raided a Hamas compound that housed different safes of Hamas, reportedly include an underground tunnel with 3 main safes that include hundreds of thousands of new Israeli shekels, hundreds of checks, and bonds worth millions of US dollars. Documents found in the safe also showed increased financial trade being done between October 2nd and October 5th, i.e. leading up to the October 7th attack. Hamas was very busy making sure it had enough finances for what was planned in the attack. In the Nusirat refugee camp, the IDF took over a rocket manufacturing area after a gun battle in the region. Footage showed that civilian factory machines had been repurposed in the factory in order to make medium and long-range rockets. A substantial tunnel network was also discovered under this factory and destroyed. In the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, that's where the main fighting is taking place, still in Han Yunis, Hamas military compound that was located in a mosque was taken over by the IDF today, with a tunnel entrance that was also found within the mosque. Explosive manufacturing areas was also uncovered and destroyed. Other reports stated that there was intensive gun battles in the western areas of Han Yunis. The IDF reported that 20 Hamas operatives were killed. The IDF also reported that it was attacked many times throughout the day with anti-tank missiles and RPGs that were launched at soldiers from different areas, and that substantial bombings were also seen in the area. These reports were somewhat confirmed today by the Al-Quds brigades, that is the Palestinian Islamic Jihad's military wing, that stated that in western Han Yunis there were intensive battles and that they had launched several rounds of RPGs at Israeli soldiers in the Al-Amal area. Al-Qassam brigades also reported intensive battles in these same areas, stating specifically Jorat al-Akkad and the Al-Amal area in Han Yunis. So all sides are somewhat agreeing that the most intensive fighting right now is happening in the western parts of Han Yunis. Other news from the Gaza Strip. The UN published today figures with results from analyses of satellite images of the Gaza Strip. According to these figures, 30% of structures in the Gaza Strip have been damaged or destroyed, citing that 22,131 structures have been completely destroyed, 14,066 structures are badly damaged, and close to 33,000 structures are also damaged. A total of 93,800 living units are reportedly damaged or destroyed throughout the entire Gaza Strip. In addition to this, Associated Press today reported satellite analyses of the buffer zone that the IDF is creating on the border between Israel and the Gaza Strip, specifically noting the flattening operations. Those are the operations that the IDF has been carrying out, basically destroying entire areas in order to make sure there are no lookout areas that could be used as sniping activity towards Israel, lookout posts, or to launch rockets. The reports state that at least 1,329 structures have been damaged or destroyed in the planned buffer area that the IDF is creating. In addition, it stated that entire neighborhoods in the areas of Beit Hanun, Jabalia refugee camp, and Sajaiya have been completely destroyed, as well as in the areas of Khirbat Khuzaa, that is down south in the Gaza Strip. The regions between those areas in the north and the south are reportedly farmland, so there's a lot less destruction of structures in those areas. However, it is noted from the satellite images that the IDF is still planning the buffer zone in those areas as well. In addition to this, another report was published today regarding the meeting between the head of the Shabak and the head of Israeli intelligence and the Egyptian officials several days ago. So this relates to the ongoing negotiations between Israel and Egypt regarding what is going to happen in Rafah, and specifically the Philadelphia line that is the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. According to the report, what the Shabak and the Israeli intelligence proposed was that an alternative to IDF presence in the Philadelphia line would be Israeli electronic surveillance equipment that would be deployed that can detect both underground movement as well as detect all movement above ground. A part of the deal is that Egypt will staff 750 police officers on its side of the border, and concurrently that Israel is going to negotiate with a Gulf country in order to convince it to fund an underground fence that will effectively disconnect Sinai from Gaza and stop weapon smugglings. Importantly, the report adds that Israel told Egypt that it is not planning a military operation in Rafah as of now. This contradicts the statements of Israel's defense minister Yoav Gallant from the last several days, where he stated after Han Yunis, Rafah is next. So likely what this means is Rafah is on the agenda of the IDF. However, the IDF is trying to propose to Egypt, if you come up with a satisfactory plan for the Philadelphia line, the IDF may not have to full-on invade Rafah, and then that will assuage some of Egypt's concerns regarding what will happen in that invasion. Regarding casualties, no IDF soldiers are reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. The total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began remains 224. 8 IDF soldiers are reported injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. The total number of IDF soldiers that are reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began is 1,296. In turn, the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting that 112 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians that were killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 27,131. 66,287 Palestinians are reported injured in the Gaza Strip, and several thousand are still buried under the rubble and presumed dead. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, stated today, and I quote, UNRWA has an important role in delivering humanitarian aid, and it is essential to conduct an investigation by the UN and an external committee in order to restore donor trust. So what she's referring to is the fact that the United States is one of many countries that froze their funding to UNRWA after Israel's allegations that 12 UNRWA members participated in the October 7th attack. She is trying to state that the United States is not agreeing with Israel that UNRWA's role is over and has to be cancelled, but instead an investigation has to happen in order to restore trust, i.e. in order to find a way for the United States to agree to restore funding. Other news, protesters in Israel continue to try to block the Nitzana crossing today, that is the crossing between Israel and Egypt, where aid trucks are inspected before they get to Rafah. Related to this, Likud ministers in Israel reportedly screamed at the police commissioner today during a meeting in the Knesset for breaking up the protests that are trying to block aid trucks in the Kerem Shalom crossing. Other news related to the humanitarian situation, the United Nations estimates came out today stating that with the additional people fleeing Khan Yunis, 1.3 million people currently reside in the area of Rafah, in an area that prior to the war housed 250,000 people. This contributes to the reports of the ongoing humanitarian disaster that is going on in Rafah and the Al-Mawasi area, specifically with streets that are completely overcrowded. The weather conditions are also making things a lot worse. There's also spread of disease and very poor access to hygiene, clean water, or basic sanitary conditions. Other news, UNICEF today published an estimate stating, and I quote, at least 17,000 children in Gaza are unaccompanied or separated from their parents. Due to the sheer lack of food, water, and shelter, extended families are distressed and face challenges to immediately take care of another child, as they themselves are struggling to cater for their own children and families. This relates to reports that have come in specifically from the refugee camps of children that are arriving without their parents, and other families are trying to take them in, but this is burdening a lot of families as well. There were no reports regarding how many trucks entered the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. Seemingly, the protests that were stopping trucks at Kerem Shalom seem to have died out. However, there was that report of protests that were blocking trucks in Nitzana. We'll likely find out tomorrow how many trucks entered in the last 24, but then it'll be 48 hours. Moving on to the West Bank, substantial IDF activity was reported in several areas of the West Bank. Specifically, confrontations were noted in the Kastra area of Nablus, also in Khawarat, Bani Hassan, and Salfit. There were also IDF activity reported in Bakat Ahyab in Kalkilia, as well as in Jenin. 25 Palestinians are reported detained in the last 24 hours. Again, I say detained because there was no IDF report on how many of them were actually arrested. According to other reports, 25 were detained. That means they were questioned by the IDF. Likely some of these at least were arrested. Other news, Canada reported today that it is considering imposing sanctions of its own on extreme violent settlers in the West Bank. This comes 24 hours after the United States imposed its first set of sanctions against 4 violent settlers. Other political news, Bezalel Smotrich, who is the leader of Religious Zionism Party in Israel, finance minister, but importantly also, he's a minister in the defense ministry, i.e. he's not the minister of defense, but he's a minister in the defense ministry in charge of specific things. One of them is in charge of the civil administration that approves housing units in the territories. It was stated today that his administration is working on the construction of 7,000 new units in settlements in the West Bank, breaking a freeze on settlement construction that has been for the last several years. When I say a freeze on settlement construction, that does not mean that settlements are not being built, but in Israel there is a distinction between unauthorized settlements that are built ad hoc by settlers in the West Bank, and authorized settlements, that is, settlements that are officially approved by Israel. So there's been an official freeze on settlements. That's why we've seen more activity in unauthorized settlements. However, he's working to legitimize more construction in these settlements. The plan, however, requires higher approval. This is likely to get stuck in bureaucracy. However, in the past, every time the ministries have announced that they are going to promote and move this forward, it has led to increased violence and strife in the West Bank. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon. Continuous rockets and missiles sent from Lebanon targeting the northern parts of Israel in the last 24 hours. Rockets targeted the areas of Avivim, Yarun. Several barrages were sent towards Kiryat Shmona. Rockets were also sent towards Hardov, Kibbutz Nir, Ma'ayan Baruch, Kfar Yuval, and Tel Chai. Regarding IDF retaliations, IDF reported that it carried out several attacks. Some of these targeted a military compound in the Bilda village of Lebanon, as well as a truck loaded with explosives and weaponry in the Shuba village. Other retaliations were reported in the Itaron area against Hezbollah units that were firing rockets. Warplanes also reportedly attacked Hezbollah military infrastructure and compounds in El Khiyam, Kfar Kana, and Jabal Balat. Artillery fire was also reported in Jabalin, Ita Ash'ab, as well as Itaron. Other political news regarding Lebanon. After reports yesterday that Israel is considering how it is going to operate vis-a-vis Hezbollah if a truce does occur between Israel and Hamas, and Hezbollah stops firing, is Israel going to stop its actions in Lebanon or not? Today, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant seemingly gave an answer, stating, "If Hezbollah thinks that during a truce down south we will cease our fire against it, it is sorely mistaken. I say it here in the most explicit way, we will not stop until we can safely return our civilians home to the north." I.e., what Yoav Gallant is saying is that in the past, in the previous truce in November, when Hezbollah stopped firing, Israel stopped firing at Lebanon and at Hezbollah, stating it will only answer fire with fire. Now he's stating, actually, Israel has a desire to move its civilians that have been evacuated back up north. This can only happen if Hezbollah is pushed further north of Lebanon. Therefore, regardless of what happens in the Gaza Strip, Israel is going to continue its operation against Hezbollah. Other news related to the north of Israel, this time Syria. Syrian military reported today intercepting several missiles that were launched from Israel towards Damascus. Hours later, Iranian media reported that an Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander, Saeed al-Idadi, was killed in an attack in the Asayda Zainab area of Damascus. Other reports stated that this attack targeted a headquarters of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. Yesterday it was reported that the Iranian Revolutionary Guards have ordered most of their officers to pull out of Syria and come back to Iran for fear of such Israeli attacks. Israel made no comment and took no responsibility for this attack. However, it does match previous attacks that seemingly all come from Israel. Moving on to the regional developments, the United States carried out today its first phase of a major retaliation against pro-Iranian militias in the region. Reportedly, 85 targets within 7 facilities, 4 in Syria and the Al-Bukhmal and Al-Miyadan region and 3 in Iraq, were attacked. The U.S. Army Central Command reported that over 125 direct missiles were launched at these different installations. The U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin clarified that this is only the first phase and more attacks are coming. The White House National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby also stated that the targets were selected in order to avoid civilian casualties, and after verifying that these militias were involved or associated with the drone attack against the Tower 22 base that killed 3 U.S. service people and wounded 40. He added that the U.S. informed the Iraqi government before the attack that took place in Iraq. Related to the militias that were attacked, Islamic Resistance in Iraq militia stated today to Al Jazeera that weapons warehouses were attacked in those facilities in Iraq, adding that an operational headquarters of Hashid al-Sha'abi, which is an umbrella organization of several pro-Iranian militias, was the target as well. The Wall Street Journal reported that Jordanian warplanes participated in the attack. This is relatively rare and is likely a sign of solidarity with the United States, given that the attacks against the U.S. base occurred on Jordanian soil. The Syrian Human Rights Observatory reported that between 13 and 18 people were killed in the attacks in Syria, and again the United States emphasized throughout the day again and again that this is only the first phase of an attack that's going to last likely several days. Other regional news related to Yemen, the IDF reported that it intercepted a ballistic missile over the Red Sea. Later in the day, the Houthi spokesperson Yahya Saria said that the Houthis launched several ballistic missiles towards the Israeli town of Eilat. In addition, different Arab news sites reported that a U.S.-British attack took place in Yemen today. Reportedly, 7 different attacks targeted areas in the Al-Jar region of the Hajjah area. Moving on to some of the political and general trends in the last 24 hours, Secretary of State in the United States, Antony Blinken, postponed his visit to the region by a few days. This is possibly associated with that retaliation. However, he's due to arrive in Israel next week. Reportedly, he's going to visit, as part of this tour, Israel, the West Bank, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Qatar, and the visit is going to focus on hostage deal, as well as ensuring humanitarian pauses and increasing humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip. In addition, Israel reported today that it is advancing a plan to allow its civilians in the areas surrounding the Gaza Strip that were attacked on October 7th to begin returning home, and that the plans are going to be brought forth on Sunday. This tells us something about how Israel is evaluating the progress of the war. Israel will not be allowing civilians to return to those areas and actually bringing forth the plans if it didn't feel at least some assurance that it has a lot more control on the ground and those areas cannot be easily targeted by rockets from the Gaza Strip. Moving on to the future of the Gaza Strip, Reuters reported today about increasing pressure in Saudi Arabia to push forward the United States' plan for a regional deal that will include somehow Israel developing and agreeing to a two-state solution with the Palestinians that will also bring a normalization with Saudi Arabia. However, what Saudi Arabia gets out of this is a very strong military alliance and defense pact with the United States. There is a report that there's increasing pressure in Saudi Arabia due to Iranian escalations to move this forward. The report stated that Saudi Arabia will even accept a political promise from Israel to establish a Palestinian state sometime in the future without any concrete steps in order to get the alliance before the U.S. elections. In other words, while Saudi Arabia publicly is saying that it is going to demand that Israel takes irreversible steps to promote a Palestinian state, this report in Reuters states actually Saudi Arabia will even be willing to just accept an Israeli promise that a Palestinian state will happen in the future. It is, however, very unlikely, and the report notes this as well, that Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to be able to even give such promise. The report states that the chances are near to zero because his government will simply fall, and thus any such promise that he would give will not be worth anything beyond the couple of months of his government falling, and thus even though Saudi Arabia may show some kind of flexibility, that is unlikely to actually move this deal forward anytime soon. That is my report of the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.